What's up, guys? It has been with Ben's election predictions, and we are back for the 2024 presidential race between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. A repeat of 2020, but it's not going to be as similar as you might think. As you remember, for my 2020 prediction, I was only one electoral vote off. So let's just dive right into it. In this video, I really want to focus on the impact of turnout. I think the one biggest factor that is going to affect this rate, uh, affect this presidential race, will be the relative turnout on the national level writ large, but also in the battleground states that we care about the most. So I think kind of similar to 2020. I think there'll be around seven or eight battleground states. And so for this race, I think they're going to be Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So that's seven states right here. And I just want to briefly kind of touch on some of the states that I did not include in the quote unquote swing state category or battleground state category. And starting just on the Democratic side. So, you know, you've been hearing some people say like, oh, like New Jersey is in play, or New Mexico might be in play if Hispanics go towards Donald Trump more than they did in 2020, 2016, which they probably will do. But, New Mexico is a state that Joe Biden won pretty handily in 2020. So even if there is a massive shift among Hispanics, Joe Biden is still likely to win that state. New Hampshire, I actually do think that Joe Biden will probably pick up ground. This is a state that Nikki Haley did very well in the GOP primary. Kind of more of a one of these New England highly educated states that is typically more competitive in like Vermont or Massachusetts, but I expect that this will probably be a likely Democrat state. Virginia is a state that's gotten a lot of press lately. There was a Fox News poll just recently that had this tied. I do think that it will be closer than it was in 2020. Joe Biden won the state by 10 points. And I do think Glenn Youngkin and him being a popular Republican governor in a bluer state, and the fact that Youngkin said that he is going to campaign for Donald Trump probably will improve Donald Trump's margin in the state. But especially with the growing population of Northern Virginia near DC, I still think this is going to be a hold for the Democrats. Joe Biden will probably win it by around 4 or 5 points, I would expect. So Donald Trump probably will improve. Minnesota, kind of similar story to Virginia. I do think Donald Trump will improve here some, but this is a state that in 2020, Joe Biden won by around 7 points. It was much more competitive in 2016 when Hillary Clinton only won the state by around 2 points. But and then moving on to the kind of likely Republican states. So Florida, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I think Donald Trump wins this state by around 5, 6, 7 points, improving from 2020. Texas will be an interesting. I think the state could be a likely or lean Republican state. It's right on the boundary. This is a state that Donald Trump won by 6 points in 2020. I think it'll be more like 4 or 5 points, so kind of right on the cusp of lean versus likely. Alaska, I do think this will be fairly close. Like in 2020, it's not a state that people will focus on that much. Donald Trump won it by um, 10 points, and they have a Democratic House representative, the one seat at large. So I do think it's going to be a little bit more competitive, but not as much. Montana is kind of a similar story to Alaska, trending left. There's going to be a competitive Senate race. I do think Donald Trump wins the state by around 7, 8 points. He won it by an even larger margin in 2020. But I I do think it's going to be more competitive. Like you've seen a lot of in migration to the state and kind of these ski towns that tend to be a little bit more liberal than the rural country. So I the likely rating is between 5 and 12 points. So I think it could be anywhere between probably that 7 and 10 range, maybe even 7 and 12, just because also the competitive Senate race as well. And kind of similar story in Ohio. This is a state that, used to be a swing state, now not as much. I think Donald Trump will win the state by 6 to 8 points, similar to like what he did in 2020. All right, so now moving on to the states that matter, you see that you need 270 electoral votes to win. So, you know, right now it's kind of a toss up. So let's first go to the lean Republican states. So I think the first state here is going to be Georgia. So this is a state that Joe Biden won in 2020, albeit very narrowly. Um, this is interesting because I think in 2020 everything went right for him to win this narrowly. Turnout was through the roof. You can see that if you round to the nearest 100,000, each candidate got 2.5 million. If you look in 2016, you know this was around Donald Trump won with 2.1 million. Voter turnout is going to be lower in Georgia in um in 2024 than it was in 2020. And I'll talk about, how lower turnout, which I think will be the case across the board. It will have different impacts state by state, but Georgia is historically a Republican state, and the lower engaged voters actually tend to be more democratic. So in 2020, the reason why Joe Biden won is because black turnout was through the roof. Stacey Abrams and her organization really worked on turning out the vote after her loss in the 2018 gubernatorial race in 2018. One other reason why I do think Georgia will flip back to the Republicans is because if you look at the results of the midterms, and the Senate race was different. Raphael Warnock was re-elected, but that race was much closer, and Herschel Walker was just a horrible, horrible candidate. Even Republicans are saying like the reason they lost that race was candidate quality, and I think we can all agree that despite all of his flaws, like Donald Trump from a nonpartisan objective level does have better candidate quality than like someone like Herschel Walker. And so I think this is evidence that Georgia is a Republican state. I think it'll probably be around 2.3 to 2.1 or something. So in Donald Trump's favor, turnout will be lower. So I think Donald Trump wins the state by around 2 or 3 points. Similar to Georgia, North Carolina has been a state that's kind of been fool's gold for the Democrats, similar to Nevada for the Republicans. Um, Donald Trump won the state by around 3 points in 2016. In 2020, it was a little bit closer. I think Donald Trump won the state by around 1 point. Um, Turnout will be lower, I think, but I think, like I said, with Georgia, with lower turnout, I think this is going to help Donald Trump. All right, moving on to the next states, I'm going to go to the lean Democratic states. So the first state that I have as lean Democratic is Michigan. And so I know y'all think this is interesting because there have been a lot of polls that have Donald Trump up in Michigan, and there's all these news stories about how the Arab population in Michigan has soured over Joe Biden, and out of all the U.S. states, Michigan does have the highest per capita Arab population. So people are talking about the protest vote in Gaza. They still represent under 2% and maybe closer to 1% of the total voting population. And not all of them are abandoning Joe Biden for Donald Trump. Some of them are going to vote third party, some of them just aren't going to vote. But overall, if we look at the margin that Joe Biden won Michigan by in 2020, it was about a 3 point margin. So what I think gets lost a lot is Michigan and Pennsylvania were so close. They were both you know Wisconsin was under a point. Pennsylvania was about a point difference. Michigan was the outlier here. It was a 3 point spread. And if we look at the 2022 midterm results here, this was a state that some Republican leaning pollsters had Tudor Dixon winning. Gretchen Whitmer, completely destroyed Tudor Dixon, beating her by over 10 points here. And you can see that even when Donald Trump won the state, 2.3 million, like 2.6 million, we're not going to have as high turnout as we did in 2020. Turnout's going to be lower. But I actually think in a historically Democratic state, when the people that made Gretchen Whitmer win this state were the people in the suburbs, you can see here that this is not as red as you would think, because Gretchen Whitmer did a lot better in the suburbs. And you see here that, like, I think it's going to be a pretty similar result to what we got in 2020. Obviously, the raw vote counts are going to be lower. I think that Donald Trump is going to pick up some young voters. He's going to pick up some Arab voters. He's going to pick up some Black voters. But I think turnout among those groups is going to be lower, so kind of muting that impact. And then also, I think, you're going to see some shifts among the college educated whites and the suburban moms, and that's going to kind of offset any of the gains that Donald Trump gets among some of those low propensity groups. So moving on, we're going to go to our tilt states. So these are states that are going to be under 2 points. So I think Joe Biden will probably win Michigan by around 2 points, 2 to 3 points. Moving on, I first want to go to the state of Nevada. So some of the polls, and the New York Times just recently had a poll where Donald Trump was up by 11 points. Donald Trump's raw vote total was up 49% in that poll. So you have to get to that magic number of 50 to really show your dominance. But while this state has been fool's gold for the Republicans for a while, I do think this is the year where they break through. You see, there was not a lot of movement from 2016 to 2022. It was exactly the same result, actually. Joe Biden won the state by 2.4 percentage points each time, but I think the polls are going to overestimate the Republican chances like they typically do. But I do think Donald Trump is going to pick up, and this will be another flip for Donald Trump in 2024. So next up, I'm going to go to the tilt Democrat states, but I'm going to leave suspense at the end because I might not fill in all of them. So Arizona is an interesting state, and I'm very conflicted about whether to put it in the tilt GOP or tilt Democratic category. I think Nevada, Donald Trump will probably win that between 1 and 2, maybe even 1 and 3 points. Arizona, I literally think is on a knife's edge. Like it could be a pure toss up. There are a lot of trends kind of going in both directions that would imply kind of like different headwinds or tailwinds for both Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So we saw in 2016, Donald Trump won the state by about 3.5 points, and then Joe Biden just very narrowly won the state in 2020. So, that's a pretty significant swing. That's a similar swing to like we saw in Texas, actually, too. So the prevailing theory would be like, oh, it might swing another 3.5 points to Joe Biden. I don't think that's going to happen. And in fact, Biden's worst issues at the border with immigration, and the people of Arizona see that on a daily basis, sometimes kind of depending on where you live. And the polls have kind of reflected that. They show Donald Trump beating Joe Biden in the state, and like an average of anywhere between 3 to 5 points. However, I don't believe in reverse coattails. Like down ballot races are going to hurt the um up ballot races like the presidential race, but I do think that the Arizona GOP since 2020 has really just gone off the rails. And you could even argue, since 2016, this was a state that, in like 2012, Mitt Romney won by 10 points. And in 2008, John McCain won it by even a greater margin. Um, there is kind of a lot of extremism, I would say, in the Arizona GOP, a lot of election denialism. I think this is one reason why you saw in the 2022 midterms that Katie Hobbs actually won, and like this was seen as like a huge upset. Um, this was one of the closer races, but like this is a race where Joe Biden is very unpopular. Some polls that carry it like up by double digits, but Katie Hobbs actually won without even running a very good campaign. So I mean, obviously turnout was a lot lower in 2022, but this makes me think that the very engaged voters, the high propensity voters, the people moving into Phoenix, the people in the Phoenix suburbs. I just, I think the state's going to be pretty static. I think whoever wins the state, it's going to be 1 point either way. But right now, I have it in Joe Biden's column. Next up is the state of Wisconsin. Um, I also do think this is going to be on a knife's edge. I have this as a tilt Democratic state. This was one of the closer states in 2020 out of the Rust Belt. Um, it was on a knife's edge both in 2016 and 2020. Turnout is going to be a little bit lower, I think, in 2024 compared to 2020. Who that helps, a little bit unclear. I actually do think that it it is hard to know really. I think it's honestly probably pretty similar to 2020 in terms of the results. Joe Biden just very narrowly wins this race. In 2022, the midterms, it was kind of a toss up. Ron Johnson won, albeit very narrowly. It was kind of closer than people anticipated. And the Democratic governor, I think Evers, won. So I think it's going to be very close. It's unclear, I guess, who we think is going to win. Pennsylvania. So the tipping point state, I think, in the 2024 election will be Pennsylvania. And if we look at the polls here, this is kind of what the no toss up real clear politics poll show. And so, as you can see, it's like I do have some differences here. I mean, Michigan, Wisconsin are like very close, so I feel good about those. I feel less confident about Arizona because you can do see that Trump has a 4 point um, lead on Biden here. Oh wait, sorry. I'm moving on to, so Pennsylvania is interesting. So it does appear like that Trump has more strength in Pennsylvania than the other Rust Belt states. The states get lumped in together a lot. Um, but overall, I still think when it comes to election day, I think that I have to give the state to Joe Biden. You saw that in 2020 when voter turnout was through the roof. Joe Biden won this by 1.2 percentage points. Um, I do think that, there's going to be less of a margin in Philadelphia. This is going to help Donald Trump. But we saw in the 2022 midterms just an absolute shellacking of the Republicans. And so I think when you have, nearly a Democratic trifecta in the state and a popular Democratic governor, I think this is going to help Joe Biden. The popular governor, Josh Shapiro, who's pretty moderate, is going to do everything he can to get Biden across the finish line here. And so there you have it. So I have it at 281 for Joe Biden and 257 for Donald Trump. I think this race is going to be even closer than 2016, 2020, which were two of the closest races in American history. But please let me know what you think of my predictions and see you guys later.